You've never been cold. Not really. You've been uncomfortable. You've been the kind of cold where you pull a blanket tighter and check how long until the heating kicks in. You've been cold in the way that makes you annoyed, but you've never been the kind of cold that ends you. Now remove the blanket. Remove the heating. Remove the insulated walls, the cooked food, the hot drink, the lighter in your pocket, the matches in the drawer. Remove fire entirely, not just your fire. All fire. No hearth. No ember. No smoldering branch carried from a lightning strike. Nothing. Just you, a body that loses heat faster than it can generate it, and a world that has absolutely no interest in keeping you alive. How did we survive that? Not as a thought experiment, as a daily reality, as the baseline condition of being human before the single most transformative technology our species ever developed even existed. This is the question almost nobody asks about early humans because fire feels so fundamental, so obviously always there. But there was a before, a long before. Hundreds of thousands of years of human and pre-human existence in which fire was not a tool, not a resource, not a warmth source, just a thing that sometimes happened to the world. Lightning, volcanic eruption, wildfire, terrifying, unpredictable, not ours, and yet we survived. Not just survived, we spread. We adapted. We pushed into environments that should have finished us. How? Let's find out. Start with the body because that's where everything begins and where modern people almost always get the first assumption wrong. When we picture early humans without fire, we tend to picture modern humans without fire. Soft, metabolically dependent on cooked food, thermally reliant on external heat sources, deeply uncomfortable below about 18 degrees. That's not what pre-fire humans were. The bodies that lived before controlled fire were not our bodies running a deficit. They were different bodies, calibrated to different baselines, shaped over millions of years by an environment that offered no shortcuts and no second chances. Brown adipose tissue is a good place to start. Most people know about fat as stored energy, the kind the body holds in reserve and burns when food is scarce. Brown fat is different. It generates heat directly through a process called thermogenesis, burning energy not to move or think but simply to produce warmth from the inside. Modern humans have relatively small amounts of it, concentrated mostly in infants and in adults who are regularly exposed to cold. Early humans likely had significantly more, maintained by an environment that demanded it continuously. This isn't speculation. It's the same physiological logic we see in cold-adapted animal species and in modern human populations that maintain higher cold exposure across their lifetimes. The body responds to demand. It always has. Pre-fire humans lived in a state of constant thermal demand. Their internal heating systems reflected that. Basal metabolic rate matters here too. The amount of energy a body burns at rest just to keep systems running is not fixed across the human species or across time. It's influenced by environment, by diet, by activity level, and by what the body has learned to expect from its world. Early humans in cold environments without fire were not conserving energy carefully in a warm shelter at night. They were burning it continuously to stay functional. Their resting metabolic rates were almost certainly higher than those of modern sedentary humans in climate-controlled environments. Not because they were trying, because their bodies had no other option. Now let's talk about something that gets almost no attention when people discuss pre-fire human survival. The architecture of the body in motion. You are warm right now, sitting still, because your environment is supporting that. Take away that support and the fastest way to generate heat becomes movement. Not the incidental movement of daily tasks, but deliberate, sustained, large muscle movement that fires up the metabolic furnace and pushes core temperature back up from the inside. Early humans almost certainly understood this not as a concept but as a sensation. You get cold, you move. You move, you get warm. The body teaches this lesson quickly and painfully. It also teaches you which movements work and which don't, which muscle groups generate the most heat the fastest, and how to sustain output long enough to matter without burning through energy you can't replace. Early humans were not sitting still and freezing. They were moving, and they were doing it with a physical intelligence that emerged from a lifetime of having no alternative. But movement alone doesn't solve everything, and here's where the social dimension becomes not just interesting but absolutely central to understanding how pre-fire humans survived. Because the most efficient heat source available to a pre-fire human was not the sun, not volcanic warmth, not a sun-baked rock. It was another human body. Shared body heat is a genuine survival mechanism, not a comfort behavior. The mathematics of it are straightforward. A single human body radiating heat into open air loses that heat to the environment continuously and rapidly. A group of human bodies in close physical contact creates a shared thermal envelope, a microclimate generated by living metabolism, that is measurably warmer than what any individual can produce alone. The person in the center of a huddled group is dramatically warmer than the person on the outside. Sleeping positions, resting arrangements, the physical density of groups during cold periods, all of this was not random or socially determined in the way we think about personal space today. It was thermally strategic. You positioned yourself close to other warm bodies because your life had a meaningful chance of depending on it. This changes how we should think about early human group structures entirely. The social bond was not a layer on top of survival. It was survival infrastructure. A human alone in a cold pre-fire world without the technology to generate external heat was in a genuinely precarious situation. A group of humans sharing body heat, sharing food, sharing knowledge about the landscape, making collective decisions about where to sleep and when to move, was a functioning thermal system. The group was the technology. Before fire, before tools sophisticated enough to fully compensate for the vulnerabilities of the individual human body, the group was the primary survival mechanism. And it worked, not because early humans were altruistic in any abstract sense, but because the feedback between cooperation and survival was immediate, constant, and unmistakable. Now let's talk about shelter, because this is where the popular imagination of early humans tends to make its biggest mistake. The default image is the cave, and the cave is real but misleading. Caves were used. They were valuable precisely because they offered what pre-fire humans desperately needed. A physical barrier between bodies and wind, a roof that interrupted rain, a space that retained some portion of the warmth generated by the bodies inside it. But caves are geographically limited, frequently occupied by other animals with better teeth, and often cold, damp, and structurally unhelpful in ways that are easy to overlook from the outside. What the archaeological and anthropological evidence actually suggests is something more impressive and less cinematic. Early humans built. Not always. Not everywhere. But the impulse to modify the environment to create protected sleeping and resting spaces appears very early in the record. Simple windbreaks. Branches arranged to interrupt the movement of cold air across a sleeping group. Leaves or dry plant material heaped as insulating ground cover to interrupt the conductive heat loss of lying directly on cold earth. These are not dramatic innovations. They don't photograph well and they don't survive in the archaeological record the way stone tools do. But they were likely ubiquitous, practiced with the same fluency that modern humans open doors and close windows, automatic responses to environmental conditions learned young and refined over a lifetime. The reading of landscape was the other half of the shelter equation, and it was arguably more sophisticated than the physical construction. Cold air sinks. Wind follows terrain. South-facing slopes in the northern hemisphere receive more sunlight and retain warmth longer after sunset. Dense vegetation creates windbreaks. Rock formations create overhangs. Certain soils hold warmth better than others. None of this requires language to learn and transmit. All of it can be learned through direct observation by individuals who are paying close attention because the consequences of not paying attention are swift and serious. Early humans read terrain the way modern humans read traffic, continuously, automatically, with the accumulated pattern recognition of years of practice in an environment where getting it wrong had immediate consequences. Good sleeping spots were survival assets. Knowing where they were was survival knowledge. The elder who knew the landscape was not a ceremonial figure. They were a thermal resource. Let's talk about food, because the relationship between diet and cold tolerance in a pre-fire world is something that almost nobody discusses and that changes the survival picture considerably. Cooked food is not just convenient. It is calorically transformed. The cooking process breaks down cell walls, denatures proteins, and makes nutrients available to the human digestive system with dramatically greater efficiency than raw food provides. Modern humans eating an exclusively raw diet consistently lose weight even when consuming what should be adequate caloric volume, because the digestive system simply cannot extract as much usable energy from uncooked food as it can from cooked. Pre-fire humans lived entirely on raw food. Their digestive systems were adapted for it in ways that ours have partially diverged from. Their gut flora, the microbial communities that drive digestion, were calibrated to a raw food world. Their jaw structures were larger and more robust, capable of the sustained mechanical processing that raw food requires. They were not suffering on raw food. They were built for it. But what they ate and how they managed food across lean periods shaped their cold tolerance directly. Fat is the body's primary fuel for thermogenesis. A diet rich in animal fat, the kind available from marrow, from fatty organs, from the dense caloric content of certain plant seeds and nuts, provides the substrate the body needs to generate internal heat. Early humans in cold environments were not eating lean. They were targeting the most calorically dense, fat-rich food sources available because their bodies communicated the need for them in the clearest possible way. The craving for fat in cold conditions is not a modern pathology. It is a survival signal that pre-fire humans followed because ignoring it had obvious consequences. Food storage matters here too. Evidence of deliberate food caching, material set aside against future scarcity, appears deeper in the prehistoric record than many people assume. The cognitive requirements for food storage. You have to understand that the future will be different from the present. You have to recognize that what's available now may not be available later. You have to resist the immediate pressure to consume in favor of preserving for a need that doesn't exist yet. This is planning, abstract temporal reasoning, the ability to model a future state and act in the present to influence it. Pre-fire humans were doing this. Not because they read about it, but because the alternative, entering a cold lean season without reserves, was a reliable path toward a very bad outcome. Now, here's the part that almost nobody brings up when they discuss pre-fire human survival, and it might be the most important piece of all. Passive solar understanding. Early humans without fire were not operating in thermal darkness. The sun is a fire. An enormous, available, absolutely reliable heat source that pre-fire humans had every reason to understand and exploit with the same practical intelligence they applied to everything else in their environment. Basking behavior is documented across the animal kingdom. It is not instinctive in the dismissive sense. It is thermally rational. You are cold. The sun is warm. You position your body to maximize surface area exposure during peak solar hours. You choose south-facing slopes and open clearings during warming periods. You move into shade during dangerous heat. This is thermoregulation using available environmental resources. Pre-fire humans did this with the same deliberate attention they brought to every other survival challenge. Watch the world. Learn what it's telling you. Act accordingly or don't, and find out what happens. Let's zoom out one final time and look at what the existence of pre-fire humans actually tells us about our species. Because the real conclusion here is not that early humans were tough or primitive or admirably savage. The real conclusion is that the human body and the human mind are more fundamentally adaptable than the fire-dependent version of ourselves makes it easy to see. We built fire into our civilization so deeply that we've forgotten what was there before. We eat cooked food so consistently that our digestive systems have genuinely shifted. We heat our environment so reliably that our baseline cold tolerance is a fraction of what it once was. We've outsourced our thermal management to technology so completely that the underlying physiological and cognitive capacity for managing without it has dimmed, not disappeared, but dimmed. Pre-fire humans didn't survive despite their circumstances. They were their circumstances. The cold, the raw food, the shared body heat, the landscape reading, the thermal intelligence embedded in where they slept and when they moved and who they stayed close to. All of it was not a problem they were struggling against. It was the world they were built for, the world that built them. They were not waiting for fire. They were complete without it. Fire changed everything, but the humans who discovered how to control it weren't starting from helpless. They were starting from a baseline of survival intelligence so refined, so embedded in the body and the group and the landscape, that fire didn't rescue them. It launched them. Everything we've built since is downstream of what they already were before the first controlled flame ever caught and held. They were cold. They were together. They were paying attention. And they made it. Without any of the tools we'd reach for first.